The spear goes through your chest like you're made of paper, cold iron piercing flesh, the shock of metal scraping against ribs, and then the familiar darkness creeping in around the edges of your vision. You've died 17 times this week, and it's only Tuesday morning in Valhalla. This is your life now. Death at breakfast, resurrection at dinner, and endless training for a war that will destroy everything you've ever known. Welcome to the most exclusive afterlife in Norse mythology, where the price of admission is dying gloriously in battle, and the daily routine would break the mind of any mortal foolish enough to think they belong here. You probably think Valhalla is a paradise for warriors, an eternal feast where heroes drink mead and swap stories about their glorious deaths. That's what the stories tell you. The reality is far more brutal. This is Odin's cosmic military academy, and you are not prepared for what it demands. Tonight we journey through the true nightmare of immortal warrior culture, where dying violently every single day is just the beginning of your problems, and where the greatest heroes in history are slowly losing their humanity in preparation for the end of the world. Because here's the truth they don't tell you in the myths. You wouldn't last a single day in the Hall of the Slain. Not because you lack courage, but because you're still human in ways that Valhalla cannot tolerate. If this kind of storytelling helps you wind down, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if these ancient tales truly help you rest. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. There's something oddly comforting about falling asleep to stories of warriors who finally found their rest, even if it wasn't quite what they expected. So take a deep breath, maybe turn on some soft rain sounds, and let's ease into tonight's journey through the Hall of the Slain, where even immortal warriors discovered that paradise had its own peculiar problems. Now dim the lights, settle into your blankets, and let's begin with why you probably wouldn't survive your first morning in Valhalla.
Let's say, for the sake of argument, that you've died gloriously in battle. Sword in hand, defiant to the end, exactly the kind of death that gets noticed by Odin's ravens. Congratulations, you've been selected for Valhalla. But before you start celebrating, let's be clear about what that actually means. You don't simply appear at the gates with a welcome packet and a room key. Now, first you're collected by a Valkyrie, and while that might sound romantic, remember that Valkyries are essentially divine battlefield paramedics with very specific orders. They're not there to chat about your heroic last stand. They're there to process souls efficiently and get back to work. The flight to Valhalla isn't gentle. You're carried across the 9 worlds, through realms where the very air might freeze a mortal's breath, past landscapes that shift between beautiful and terrifying without warning. And you're doing this journey as a spirit, which means every sensation is both more intense and somehow distant, like experiencing everything through water. When you finally arrive at Valhalla, the first thing you notice isn't its beauty, it's its size. The hall has 540 doors, each wide enough for 800 warriors to march through side by side. Do the math on that. This isn't a cozy mead hall where everyone knows your name. This is a complex large enough to house millions of warriors, and you've just become the newest resident in what is essentially a cosmic military base. The second thing you notice is the roof. It's not made of wood or stone, but of shields, overlapping like scales on a serpent's back. These aren't decorative shields either. They're the actual shields of warriors who fell in battle, now serving as eternal architecture. Your own shield might be up there someday, part of the infrastructure, which is either deeply meaningful or slightly unsettling depending on your perspective. The walls are lined with spears, not hung there for decoration, but growing from the walls themselves like a forest of metal and wood. Everything in Valhalla serves multiple purposes. Beauty, yes, but also function. Always function. This is a place designed by someone who understood that form should follow purpose. And the purpose here is preparation for war. And the noise. Ugh, the noise. Millions of warriors talking, laughing, arguing, training. The constant clatter of weapons, the thud of shields, the scrape of mail. This isn't the peaceful paradise you might have imagined. It's more like the world's largest military academy, and you've just enrolled in an intensive program that will last until the end of the world. But let's step back a moment and consider what you actually know about being a warrior. If you're a modern person, you probably know very little about maintaining armor, sharpening weapons, or the dozens of daily tasks that keep a fighting force ready for battle. The average Viking warrior spent far more time on maintenance than on fighting, and in Valhalla, that ratio doesn't improve.
Your first day begins before dawn, because in Valhalla, every day begins before dawn. Not because there's a sunrise to watch. The light in Valhalla comes from the glowing mane of a deer named Eikthyr, who stands atop the hall, and it doesn't follow earthly patterns, but because the schedule has been set by Odin himself, and Odin has very strong opinions about punctuality. You're awakened not by a gentle shake or a bell, but by the sound of a horn, the Horn specifically, blown by Heimdall to signal the beginning of another day of preparation. And when that horn sounds, you move. Not because you want to, but because every other warrior in the hall is moving, and standing still in a crowd of millions of armed dead people is inadvisable. Breakfast isn't served to you. You serve yourself from the body of Sarimnir, a boar that is killed and cooked fresh every morning, then resurrects itself each evening to be killed again the next day. This might sound convenient, but consider the logistics. Millions of warriors, one boar, and a serving system that relies on everyone being civilized about portions. Now, you might think that being dead means you don't need to eat, but you'd be wrong. In Valhalla, you have a body again, one that feels hunger, thirst, fatigue, and pain. The difference is that this body is essentially indestructible. You can be cut to pieces in training and be whole again by evening. This sounds like an advantage until you realize what it means for the daily training schedule. Speaking of training, let's talk about what that actually involves. Every day after the hurried breakfast, all the warriors of Valhalla go out into the courtyard and fight. Not spar, not practice, but actually fight. They hack each other to pieces, crush skulls, pierce hearts, and die, truly die, only to be restored at the end of the day to do it all again tomorrow. This isn't a metaphor or a gentle training exercise. This is full contact warfare every single day, with opponents who have been perfecting their skills for centuries or even millennia. You, with your modern understanding of conflict, would last roughly as long as it takes for the nearest berserker to notice you don't know how to properly hold a shield. And this daily battle isn't optional. It's not something you can skip because you're having an off day or because you'd rather spend time exploring the hall. This is the entire point of Valhalla, to prepare for Ragnarok, the final battle at the end of the world. Every warrior there is training for the most important fight in cosmic history, and they take it seriously. But even if you were an experienced warrior in life, even if you knew your way around a sword and shield, you'd still be facing challenges you've never encountered. The weapons in Valhalla aren't normal weapons. They're forged by dwarven smiths from materials that don't exist in Midgard. They're sharper than anything you've ever held, heavier than you expect, and they respond to intent as much to physical manipulation. Your armor, too, would be unfamiliar. Norse mail wasn't like the plate armor of later periods. It was rings of metal linked together that moved like fabric but weighed like stone. It distributed the weight of blows across your entire torso, but it also distributed the impact, which means every hit you take resonates through your entire body. After a full day of fighting, even with an indestructible body, you'd feel like you had been used as a bell.
And let's not forget about your fellow warriors. These aren't the friendly faces you might have known in life. These are the greatest fighters from across all of history.
drawn from every culture that honored battlefield courage. You'd be training alongside Celtic warriors who fought the Romans, Saxon berserkers who terrorized medieval Europe, and Viking raiders who thought your modern ideas about fair fighting were quaint at best. The language barrier alone would be overwhelming. While all souls in Valhalla can understand each other when they need to, the casual conversation happens in dozens of different tongues, and the cultural differences are vast. What you consider brave, others might see as foolish. What you see as strategy, they might view as cowardice. And in a place where honor matters more than life, misunderstandings can be deadly. Even the simple act of walking through Valhalla would challenge you. The hall is built on a scale designed for gods and giants, not for human comfort. Doorways are vast, corridors stretch for miles, and everything is designed to make you feel small. Which, compared to some of your fellow residents, you would be. Not all the warriors in Valhalla were human in life, and some of them retained their divine or giant heritage in death. But perhaps the most challenging thing about your first day in Valhalla wouldn't be the fighting or the scale or the cultural confusion. It would be the realization that this is forever. Not a long time, not until you get bored, but literally until the end of the world. And in Norse cosmology, that's a very specific and very distant date. You would wake up every morning to the same horn, eat the same boar, fight the same endless battle, and fall asleep in the same vast hall, knowing that tomorrow would be identical, and the tomorrow after that, and the one after that, for thousands upon thousands of years. And that's just day one.
Now that you've survived your first morning in Valhalla, let's discuss something that would become apparent very quickly. Your complete and utter lack of status in the divine hierarchy. You see, Valhalla isn't a democracy or even a meritocracy in the way you might understand it. It's a carefully structured organization with Odin at the top and you, the newest arrival, at the very bottom. Odin isn't just the king of the gods, he's the All-Father, the one who gave up his eye for wisdom, who hung himself from the world tree for 9 days and nights to learn the runes, who commands the ravens that see everything and the wolves that hunt the worlds. He's also, by most accounts, not particularly interested in your personal comfort or your opinions about how things should be run. In life, you might have been a leader, a person of importance, someone whose voice carried weight. In Valhalla, you're a recruit, and not just any recruit, but a recruit in an army that has been training since the world began. The warrior who might condescend to teach you how to properly grip a spear has been dead for 1,000 years and has been perfecting that grip every single day since. Below Odin, but still infinitely above you, are the Einhajar, the honored dead who have proven themselves in the daily battles. These aren't just the warriors who died gloriously. These are the warriors who have excelled in the cosmic boot camp of Valhalla. They've earned their place through centuries of effort, and they didn't earn it to be patient with newcomers who don't understand the basic principles of 9-dimensional warfare. The Valkyries, too, have a rank structure that you're not part of. They're not just divine messengers, they're choosers of the slain, shield maidens, battle sisters with their own complex relationships and responsibilities. They serve the mead in Valhalla's hall, but they're not serving it to you because you're charming. They're serving it because it's their duty, and because the mead itself is part of the preparation for Ragnarok. This mead, incidentally, isn't your local tavern's honey wine. It comes from the udders of a goat named Heidrun, who feeds on the leaves of the world tree and produces an endless supply of the finest mead in all the 9 worlds. It never runs out, it never sours, and it has properties that help maintain the immortal bodies of the Einhajar. It's also probably stronger than anything you've ever tasted, which adds another layer of difficulty to your already challenging existence. The daily routine of Valhalla isn't designed around your convenience or comfort. It's designed around the needs of Odin's great strategy for Ragnarok, and that strategy has been in development for eons. Every tradition, every ritual, every seemingly arbitrary rule has been refined through centuries of experience. The fact that you don't understand why things are done a certain way doesn't mean they're open to your suggestions for improvement.
Take the seating arrangements in the Great Hall, for example. They're not random, and they're certainly not based on when you arrived. They're based on a complex system of honor, achievement, and tactical necessity that reflects the chain of command for the final battle. New arrivals sit near the doors, not because it's less prestigious, though it is, but because in the event of an emergency, they'll be the first to respond and the first to fall. The warriors seated closer to Odin's high table aren't just more honored, they're more strategically important. They're the ones who will lead companies in the final battle, who will make the decisions that could save or doom the 9 worlds. They've earned their positions through demonstrated excellence in the daily training, and they maintain those positions by continuing to excel. This means that if you want to advance in Valhalla's hierarchy, you'll need to outfight beings who have been dead longer than your civilization has existed. You'll need to prove yourself not just capable, but exceptional, in contests where your opponents include heroes from every culture that ever honored bravery in battle. And you'll need to do this while learning entirely new ways of thinking about combat, strategy, and honor. The weapons training alone would overwhelm most people. In Valhalla, you're not just learning to use a sword or spear. You're learning to use them against opponents who might be giants, who might have supernatural strength, who might use tactics developed in realms where the laws of physics work differently than they do in Midgard. The berserkers who fought while channeling the spirits of bears and wolves didn't lose those abilities when they died. If anything, they've refined them.
And it's not just individual combat. Much of the training in Valhalla focuses on formation fighting, on working as part of a unit, in battles that will span multiple realms and involve forces you can't even imagine. You need to learn to follow orders instantly, without question, even when those orders seem to contradict everything you think you know about tactics. Because the orders are coming from generals who have been studying 9-dimensional warfare for millennia. The chain of command in Valhalla reflects not just military necessity, but cosmic necessity. When Ragnarok comes, the battle will determine not just the fate of Asgard, but the fate of all existence. The forces of chaos, led by Loki and his monstrous children, will bring powers that could unmake reality itself. The strategy for dealing with these forces has been developed by Odin, who traded his eye for the wisdom to see how the battle could be won, and who hung himself from the world tree to learn the magic that might make victory possible. Your role in this cosmic drama, at least initially, is to follow orders and try not to get in the way. You're not being consulted about strategy. You're not being asked for your input on tactics. You're being trained to perform specific functions in a plan so complex that even understanding your small part of it might take decades. This might be frustrating for someone accustomed to independence, but it reflects a hard truth about Valhalla. This isn't about personal glory or individual achievement. This is about the survival of existence itself. And that takes precedence over your comfort, your preferences, or your sense of personal importance.
The social dynamics of Valhalla would also be challenging for someone from the modern world. Honor, in the Norse sense, isn't just about being brave in battle. It's about fulfilling your obligations, maintaining your word, and accepting the consequences of your actions without complaint.
The warrior culture of Valhalla has been distilled to its essence, and that essence doesn't have much patience for moral relativism or situational ethics. If you give your word, you keep it, even if circumstances change. If you accept the challenge, you face it, even if you're outmatched. If you fail in your duty, you accept the consequences, even if they seem harsh. This isn't cruelty, it's necessity. When the final battle comes, every warrior will need to know that they can trust every other warrior completely, and that trust is built through centuries of consistent behavior. The entertainment in Valhalla would also be unfamiliar. These warriors don't relax by watching television or reading books. They tell stories, but the stories are about real battles they've fought, real people they've known, real deeds they've witnessed. They play games, but the games are training exercises disguised as entertainment. They sing songs, but the songs are about heroes and honor and the preparation for the end of the world. Even the friendships you might form would be different from any relationships you've known. These are bonds forged in daily battle, tested in the knowledge that all of you are preparing for a fight that will determine the fate of everything. There's an intensity to these relationships that comes from knowing that you will stand together at the end of the world, and that how well you know and trust each other might determine whether existence itself survives.
And through it all, you would be constantly aware that you are the least experienced person in a vast community of experts. Every conversation would remind you of how much you don't know. Every training session would reveal new levels of skill that you haven't even begun to approach. Every meal would be shared with beings who have stories that span centuries and achievements that reshape the meaning of heroism. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Many people find purpose and meaning in being part of something larger than themselves, in working toward a goal that transcends personal concerns. But it would require a complete reimagining of who you are and what your life means. The person you were in life, with all your relationships and responsibilities and personal goals, would become just a memory, replaced by a new identity defined entirely by your role in the cosmic struggle. And that transformation would happen whether you wanted it to or not, because Valhalla doesn't accommodate individual preferences. It shapes you into what it needs you to be. And what it needs you to be is a warrior capable of standing against the end of the world. Everything else about you, everything that makes you distinctly yourself, becomes secondary to that primary function. This is why you wouldn't last a day in Valhalla as the person you are now. Not because you'd be killed, though you would be, but because the person you are now couldn't survive the process of becoming the person Valhalla would make you into. Let's talk about what a typical day actually looks like in Valhalla, because the routine itself would break most people long before the combat training had a chance to. You see, when you have eternity to prepare for one battle, the preparation becomes extraordinarily thorough, and thoroughness in military training tends to be uncomfortable. Every day begins at what we might call dawn, though time works differently in Asgard. The light comes not from a sun rising over the horizon, but from the deer Eikthyr, standing on Valhalla's roof, whose antlers glow with divine radiance. This light doesn't gradually brighten like a sunrise. It switches on like a cosmic lamp, going from darkness to full daylight instantly. There's no gentle awakening, no time to adjust. One moment you're asleep, the next moment the horn is blowing, and millions of warriors are getting ready for another day of preparation.
The first challenge is simply getting out of your sleeping space. Remember, there are millions of warriors in Valhalla, and while the hall is vast, the sleeping arrangements are more like a military barracks than a luxury hotel. You're not getting a private room. You might not even get a private sleeping space. The accommodations are functional, designed to house the maximum number of warriors with the minimum amount of wasted space. Your bedding isn't soft cotton or down feathers. It's whatever serves the dual purpose of providing rest and maintaining the military discipline that keeps millions of warriors organized. Think less comfortable mattress and more sleeping roll that can be quickly stowed when the horn sounds. The goal isn't your comfort, it's efficiency in getting everyone ready for the day's activities. Personal hygiene in Valhalla presents its own challenges. There are facilities, certainly. The hall has access to streams that flow from the world tree, and the water has properties that keep the immortal bodies of the Inheriar clean and healthy. But you're sharing these facilities with millions of other warriors, and the morning routine is not leisurely. Everyone needs to be ready when the training begins, and the training begins when Odin says it begins. The breakfast situation, as we've mentioned, involves the boar Sarimir, who is killed fresh each morning and provides enough meat to feed all the warriors in Valhalla. But enough doesn't mean abundant in the sense you might expect. It means precisely sufficient, with no waste tolerated. You get your portion, you eat it efficiently, and you move on to the day's activities. There's no lingering over breakfast, no second helpings, and definitely no accommodations for dietary preferences you might have had in life. The meat itself would be unlike anything you've eaten. This is divine boar, fed on divine acorns, killed by divine hands and cooked over divine fire. It's probably more nourishing than anything that exists in Midgard, but it's also probably prepared in ways that reflect Norse cooking traditions rather than modern preferences. Think roasted over open flame, seasoned with whatever herbs grow in Asgard, and served in a manner designed to fuel warriors for intensive physical training rather than to please delicate palates.
After breakfast comes the day's main activity, the training battle. And this is where most modern people would face their first truly insurmountable challenge. This isn't sparring or mock combat or carefully controlled practice. This is actual warfare with actual weapons against actual enemies who are genuinely trying to kill you. The only difference from real war is that everyone who dies in the morning training is restored to life in the evening. But dying, even when you know you'll be restored, is still dying. Your immortal body feels pain, experiences trauma, goes through the actual process of death. You might be run through with a spear, feel your life draining away, experience the cold darkness of death, and then wake up hours later whole and unharmed. This would be psychologically devastating for someone not accustomed to it. The weapons used in these training battles aren't padded or doled for safety. They're the same weapons that will be used in Ragnarok. Swords that can cut through almost anything, spears that never miss their mark, axes that can cleave through armor and bone like they were cutting cheese. Learning to fight with these weapons means learning to fight against these weapons, and that means experiencing their effects firsthand. Your opponents in these daily battles aren't beginners like yourself. They're warriors who have been perfecting their skills for centuries. Some of them were legendary in life, heroes whose names are still remembered in Midgard, champions who single-handedly defeated armies.
berserkers who fought while channeling the spirits of predatory animals. And they've had nothing to do for centuries except get better at fighting.
The tactical complexity of these battles would also overwhelm someone with modern military experience. These aren't just individual duels or even small unit actions. These are massive engagements involving millions of participants, using strategies developed for fighting in multiple realms simultaneously. The battlefield might shift from Asgard to other worlds mid-combat, and you'd be expected to adapt instantly to different gravitational fields, different atmospheric conditions, different laws of physics. The magic involved in Valhalla's training would be another completely foreign element. Many of the weapons are enchanted. Some of the warriors can channel divine power, and the battles themselves sometimes involve supernatural elements that don't exist in Midgard. You might find yourself fighting an opponent who can become temporarily incorporeal, or facing a warrior whose armor is warded against specific types of attacks, or dealing with weapons that have minds of their own. After the morning's battle, when everyone has been killed at least once and restored to health, comes the afternoon's activities. These might involve individual weapons training, tactical seminars, or specialized instruction in the various forms of combat that will be needed in Ragnarok. Remember, the final battle won't just be sword-to-sword combat. It will involve siege warfare, naval battles, aerial combat, and forms of fighting that don't exist in Midgard. The physical demands of this training would be extraordinary even for your immortal body. Yes, you can't be permanently injured, but you can still be exhausted, and the training is designed to push every warrior to their absolute limits every single day. By the end of the afternoon, you would be as tired as you've ever been in life, and that's before the evening's activities. The evening meal is another portion of Sarimnir, along with the divine mead from Hadron. The mead has restorative properties that help maintain the immortal bodies of the Einherja, but it's also alcoholic, and Norse drinking culture was not known for moderation. The evening meal isn't just about nutrition. It's about maintaining the social bonds that hold the army together. And that means participating in the drinking, the storytelling, and the complex social rituals that define warrior culture. These evening gatherings aren't casual parties. They're structured social events with their own rules and expectations. Seating is arranged by rank and honor. Stories are told in specific orders, and challenges are issued and accepted according to long-established protocols. As the newest arrival, you'd be expected to listen more than speak, to show proper respect to your betters, and to demonstrate that you understand your place in the hierarchy. The stories told in these evening gatherings would be unlike anything you've heard. These are first-hand accounts of battles that shaped history, personal reminiscences of heroes you thought were mythical, detailed discussions of tactics and strategy that have been refined through centuries of experience. The casual conversation would be about topics completely outside your experience. The relative merits of different types of divine armor, the tactical implications of fighting in realms where time moves differently, the personal quirks of gods and giants who will be your allies or enemies in the final battle. The drinking songs would be war songs, celebrating battles and heroes and the glory of dying well. The jokes would be warrior humor, often dark, usually involving death or violence or the absurdities of military life. The challenges issued would be serious matters of honor, to be settled the next day in combat. Everything would be colored by the warrior culture that defines life in Valhalla.
After the evening meal comes the only real rest period of the day, but even this isn't quite what you might expect. Sleep in Valhalla isn't just physical recovery. It's also when the divine properties of the hall work to restore and strengthen the immortal bodies of the Einarhar. Your dreams might be filled with visions of the coming battle, tactical insights sent by Odin, or memories of the day's training enhanced by divine wisdom. And then, after what feels like far too little time, the deer's antlers begin to glow again, the horns sound, and another day begins exactly like the last one. Same breakfast, same battle, same training, same evening meal, same social obligations. Day after day, year after year, century after century, until Ragnarok finally comes. The psychological challenges of this routine would be immense. Humans are not designed for true immortality, and the endless repetition of the same activities, even activities you enjoy, can become a form of torture. The warriors in Valhalla cope with this in various ways, some through complete dedication to perfection in their craft, others through the deep friendships forged in shared experience, still others through a kind of meditative acceptance of their role in the cosmic order. But these coping mechanisms take time to develop, and in the meantime, you'd be facing the day-to-day reality of a routine designed for beings who don't have the psychological limitations of mortals. The constant physical challenges, the unchanging schedule, the social pressures, the endless preparation for a battle that might not come for thousands of years, all of this would wear away at your sanity long before it strengthened your sword arm. And perhaps most challenging of all would be the gradual realization that this routine, which seems so difficult and overwhelming at first, will eventually become easy. Your immortal body will adapt, your skills will improve, your mind will adjust to the rhythm of eternal preparation. You will become exactly what Valhalla is designed to make you, a perfect warrior, completely dedicated to the final battle, with every other aspect of your personality subordinated to that single purpose. The person you were in life, with all your individual quirks and personal interests and human limitations, will be slowly but inevitably transformed into something that can function effectively as part of Odin's army. And while that transformation might be necessary for the survival of the Nine Worlds, it would mean the death of everything that made you uniquely yourself. That's perhaps the deepest challenge of Valhalla's daily routine. Not just that it's difficult or demanding or dangerous, but that it's designed to fundamentally change who you are. And for most people, that change would be more frightening than any physical danger they might face.
Now let's discuss something that rarely gets mentioned in the popular stories about Valhalla: the politics. Because when you have millions of warriors from different cultures, different time periods, and different value systems all living together for eternity, there are going to be disagreements. And when those disagreements involve immortal beings with access to divine weapons, the resolution process can get complicated. The first political reality you'd encounter is that Valhalla isn't actually a democracy, or even a meritocracy in the way modern people understand those concepts. It's a theocratic military hierarchy, with Odin at the top, and Odin's decisions are final. He doesn't consult with committees, he doesn't take votes, and he doesn't explain his reasoning to subordinates. When the All-Father makes a decision, that decision becomes reality, regardless of how anyone else feels about it. This might seem straightforward until you realize that Odin's decisions are based on his unique perspective as a god who traded his eye for wisdom and hung himself from the world tree to learn the secrets of the runes. His understanding of time, causality, and cosmic necessity is fundamentally different from human understanding. What seems like arbitrary or even cruel decisions to you might be parts of incredibly complex strategies that you're literally incapable of comprehending. For example, Odin might decide to reorganize the entire command structure of Valhalla based on a vision he received during one of his shamanic trances. Thousands of warriors who had spent centuries earning their positions might suddenly find themselves reassigned to completely different roles. From their perspective, this could seem unfair or even capricious. From Odin's perspective, it might be a necessary adjustment to prepare for a specific aspect of Ragnarok that won't be relevant for another millennium. The Valkyries add another layer of complexity to Valhalla's political structure. They're not just divine servants or waitresses serving mead. They're independent agents with their own agendas, relationships, and occasionally conflicting loyalties. Some are more closely aligned with Odin's interests, others might have their own interpretations of what's best for Asgard, and a few might even have sympathies that extend to other pantheons or realms. This means that the Valkyrie who brought you to Valhalla might have had her own reasons for choosing you, reasons that have nothing to do with Odin's strategic needs. Maybe she saw potential in you that others missed, or maybe she was settling a personal debt, or maybe she was part of a larger political maneuvering that you know nothing about. You could find yourself unwittingly involved in divine politics that span centuries and involve consequences you can't imagine. The cultural divisions among the Einherjar create another source of political tension. You have warriors from every culture that honored battlefield courage, spanning thousands of years of human history. Celtic warriors who fought the Romans share space with Saxon berserkers who raided Celtic settlements. Vikings who conquered Saxon territories train alongside Norman knights who conquered Viking settlements. Everyone in Valhalla died honorably, but they didn't necessarily die fighting for compatible causes.
These cultural differences go deeper than just historical grudges. They involve fundamentally different ideas about honor, loyalty, strategy, and the proper conduct of warfare. What one culture considers a perfectly acceptable tactical advantage, another might view as dishonorable cheating. What one group sees as necessary military discipline, another might interpret as tyrannical oppression. For instance, Roman military doctrine emphasized discipline, formation fighting, and following orders without question. Celtic warrior culture valued individual prowess, personal honor, and the right of warriors to choose their own battles. Viking traditions combined elements of both, but added a strong emphasis on loyalty to personal chiefs rather than abstract principles. Getting all these different warrior cultures to work together requires constant negotiation and compromise. The language barriers add yet another complication. While divine magic ensures that everyone in Valhalla can communicate when necessary, casual conversation still happens in native tongues, and the nuances of meaning that are crucial to political discourse don't always translate perfectly. Misunderstandings that might be minor diplomatic incidents in life become serious matters of honor in an environment where everyone is armed and immortal. Then there are the logistics of governing a population of millions. Every decision about resource allocation, training schedules, living arrangements, and strategic planning affects enormous numbers of people. When you change the breakfast schedule, you're affecting millions of warriors. When you reorganize the training grounds, you're disrupting routines that might have been in place for centuries.
These logistical challenges create opportunities for ambitious warriors to gain influence by becoming essential to the administrative functions of Valhalla. The warrior who understands how to efficiently organize weapon storage for millions of divine armaments becomes politically valuable. The Einherjar, who can mediate disputes between different cultural groups, becomes someone whose opinion matters in broader policy discussions. But gaining political influence in Valhalla requires navigating a system where the ultimate authority is divine and absolute, while the practical power is distributed among beings who have been accumulating experience and relationships for millennia. You can't just arrive and start making suggestions for improvement, no matter how good those suggestions might be. You need to first prove yourself worthy of being heard and then demonstrate that your ideas align with the cosmic purposes that justify Valhalla's existence. The economic system of Valhalla, such as it is, creates its own political dynamics. There's no money in the traditional sense, but there are still resources that are limited or require effort to obtain. The best weapons, the most effective armor, the choicest training opportunities. These things aren't distributed randomly. They're allocated based on merit, seniority, political connections, and divine favor.
This means that advancement in Valhalla isn't just about being good at fighting. It's about understanding how to work within a complex social system where personal relationships, cultural affiliations, and political alliances all play roles in determining who gets access to what resources. You need to know which Valkyrie to approach about getting better equipment, which Einherjar to befriend if you want access to advanced training, which cultural groups to align yourself with for mutual support. The religious aspects of Valhalla add another layer of political complexity. While everyone there serves Odin in the sense of preparing for Ragnarok, not everyone has the same relationship with the broader Norse pantheon. Some warriors might have personal connections to other gods, Thor, Freya, Tyr, Balder, and these connections can create competing loyalties and conflicting interests. For example, a warrior who was particularly devoted to Thor in life might have strong opinions about battle tactics that emphasize individual strength and direct confrontation. A warrior who honored Freya might prefer strategies that incorporate magical elements and diplomatic solutions. A follower of Tyr might insist on conducting warfare according to strict codes of honor that other warriors consider tactically limiting. These religious differences aren't just matters of personal preference. They're political positions that can affect everything from training methods to strategic planning. When Odin makes decisions that seem to favor one approach over another, it can create resentment among warriors who feel their spiritual traditions are being devalued or ignored. The arrival of new warriors creates ongoing political disruption. Every time someone new is brought to Valhalla, it changes the dynamics of whatever group they're assigned to. If you're placed in a unit dominated by warriors from a particular culture or time period, your presence might tip the balance of internal politics in ways that have consequences you won't understand until much later. Similarly, the advancement or demotion of individual warriors affects the political landscape. When someone who has been a minor figure for centuries suddenly distinguishes themselves and gains influence, it changes relationship networks throughout their section of the hierarchy. When a long-established leader makes a serious mistake and loses status, it creates opportunities for others to advance.
but also disrupts alliances and partnerships that might have been stable for generations. The information networks in Valhalla are crucial to understanding its politics. Odin's ravens bring news from across the 9 worlds, but that information is filtered through divine priorities before it reaches the Einherjar. What you know about current events, threats to Asgard, or changes in the cosmic situation depends on your position in the hierarchy and your relationships with those who have access to better intelligence. This creates opportunities for political maneuvering based on information advantages. A warrior who has cultivated relationships with well-connected Valkyries might know about strategic changes before they're officially announced. Someone who has earned the respect of senior Einherjar might have access to tactical intelligence that helps them excel in training. Knowledge becomes a form of political capital that can be traded for influence, resources, or advancement. The justice system in Valhalla reflects its military nature and divine authority. Disputes are resolved through formal combat, divine judgment, or direct intervention by Odin or the Valkyries. There are no courts, no appeals processes, and no presumption of innocence. If you're accused of wrongdoing, you either prove your innocence through trial by combat, accept the judgment of your superiors, or face the consequences of defying divine authority. This system works efficiently for a society of immortal warriors, but it can be shocking for someone accustomed to modern legal concepts. The idea that disputes are settled through violence, that authority figures don't need to justify their decisions, and that there's no higher appeal than divine judgment requires a complete rethinking of how conflicts should be resolved.
The social aspects of Valhalla's politics revolve around the evening gatherings where warriors share meals, tell stories, and strengthen the bonds that will be crucial in battle. These aren't just social events. They're political forums where alliances are formed, information is exchanged, and reputations are built or destroyed. How you conduct yourself during these gatherings affects your standing in the community and your opportunities for advancement. The storytelling traditions are particularly important because they're how the Einherjar preserve and transmit their cultural values. The stories that get told and how they're told influence the moral and strategic thinking of the entire community. A warrior who becomes known as a skilled storyteller gains a platform for shaping opinion and promoting particular viewpoints about honor, tactics, and the proper conduct of war. The competitive aspects of daily life in Valhalla create ongoing political dynamics. Every training exercise, every combat drill, every demonstration of skill is both preparation for Ragnarok and competition for status within the community. How well you perform relative to others affects not just your own advancement, but the standing of whatever groups you're associated with. This means that your success or failure reflects on your cultural background, your training partners, your sponsors within the hierarchy, and anyone else who has invested in your development. The pressure to excel isn't just personal, it's political, because your performance affects the reputation and influence of everyone connected to you. The long-term nature of existence in Valhalla creates political dynamics that span centuries or millennia. Alliances formed during your first years there might still be relevant thousands of years later. Enemies made through careless words or thoughtless actions might oppose you for longer than entire civilizations exist in Midgard.
The relationships you build and the reputation you develop have consequences that extend far beyond anything you experienced in mortal life. This temporal perspective affects how politics work in Valhalla. Quick fixes and short-term advantages are less important than building sustainable relationships and maintaining consistent principles over extremely long periods. A warrior who is known for keeping their word, honoring their commitments, and treating others fairly will accumulate political capital over centuries. Someone who is opportunistic, unreliable, or dishonorable will find themselves increasingly isolated as their reputation spreads. The preparation for Ragnarok gives urgency to all of Valhalla's political activities. Every decision, every alliance, every policy change is evaluated in terms of how it will affect the final battle. This creates a unifying purpose that helps resolve many potential conflicts, but it also means that political disputes can become matters of cosmic importance.
When warriors disagree about strategy, training methods, or resource allocation, they're not just arguing about personal preferences. They're debating approaches that could determine the fate of all existence. This adds weight to every political discussion and makes compromise more difficult, because everyone believes that their position is not just personally important, but cosmically necessary. And finally, there's the question of what happens to the politics of Valhalla when Ragnarok actually arrives. All the careful hierarchies, all the cultural accommodations, all the political alliances that have been built over millennia will be tested in a single decisive battle. The warriors who have spent eternity preparing for this moment will discover whether their political arrangements actually serve the cosmic purposes they were designed to support. For a newcomer to Valhalla, understanding and navigating these political realities would be at least as challenging as mastering the combat training. You'd need to learn not just how to fight, but how to function within a complex social system that operates according to principles completely different from anything in the mortal world. And you need to do this while maintaining the respect and trust of beings who have had centuries to perfect their own understanding of how Valhalla's politics actually work.
Let's discuss something that the glorious tales of Valhalla rarely mention: the psychological impact of dying violently every single day for centuries. Because while your immortal body might regenerate perfectly after each training battle, your mind has to process the experience of death over and over again. And human psychology wasn't designed for that kind of repetitive trauma. In your first week in Valhalla, death would be terrifying. The pain of a spear through your chest, the darkness creeping in around the edges of your vision, the cold weight of your life draining away. These are experiences that every part of your brain interprets as the ultimate catastrophe. Even knowing intellectually that you'll be restored to life in the evening doesn't change your body's fundamental response to the process of dying. Your nervous system doesn't understand the difference between temporary death and permanent death. As far as your amygdala is concerned, every training battle is a life or death situation, and it floods your system with stress hormones accordingly. The result is that you spend every morning in a state of extreme fight or flight arousal, which is exhausting even for an immortal body. After the first month, the acute terror might fade, but it would be replaced by other psychological challenges. Some warriors develop a kind of dissociation,
mentally separating themselves from the experience of death to make it psychologically manageable. They go through the motions of combat without fully engaging emotionally, treating their deaths as technical problems to be solved rather than personal tragedies to be endured. Others develop an addiction to the intensity of the experience. The combination of extreme danger, complete focus, and ultimate consequence creates a kind of psychological high that can become compulsive. These warriors start taking unnecessary risks in training, not because they're tactically sound, but because they crave the emotional rush of facing death deliberately. Still others develop what we might recognize as a form of depression. When death loses its meaning, life can lose its meaning too. The knowledge that nothing you do in training has permanent consequences can make the entire experience feel hollow and pointless. Why struggle to improve your skills when failure just means starting over tomorrow? Why form attachments to other warriors when those relationships are built on shared experiences that don't really matter?
The repetitive nature of the daily routine compounds these psychological challenges. Humans are designed to adapt to new situations, learn from experience, and build toward future goals. But in Valhalla, every day is essentially identical. Every goal is the same distant preparation for Ragnarok, and every experience teaches you lessons that you'll have countless opportunities to relearn. This can lead to a kind of psychological stagnation where warriors stop growing as individuals because there's no need to adapt to changing circumstances. The skills that served them well in their first century of training will serve them just as well in their 10th century. The relationships they formed early in their Valhalla existence might remain essentially unchanged for millennia. The social dynamics of immortal warrior culture create their own psychological pressures. In mortal life, most people have the opportunity to reinvent themselves, to move to new places, to start over when relationships become difficult or identities become limiting. In Valhalla, you're stuck with the same people forever, and they're stuck with you. This means that early impressions have enormous long-term consequences. If you develop a reputation as a coward, a braggart, or a troublemaker in your first few decades, that reputation will follow you for eternity. There's no escaping to a new town where nobody knows your history, no starting fresh with a different group of friends, no opportunity to leave your mistakes behind and begin again. The competitive environment of Valhalla creates additional psychological stress. When everyone around you is constantly improving their combat skills, standing still means falling behind. You're not just competing against your current performance, you're competing against warriors who have had centuries to perfect their techniques. The pressure to constantly improve, combined with the knowledge that others are improving too, can create a kind of psychological arms race that never ends. The cultural isolation that many warriors experience adds another layer of difficulty. If you're one of only a few representatives of your particular culture or time period, you might find yourself without anyone who truly understands your background, your values, or your way of thinking. You're surrounded by millions of warriors, but you might still feel profoundly alone because none of them share the cultural context that shaped your identity. The religious aspects of Valhalla can also create psychological conflicts. In life, your relationship with the divine might have been personal, private, and largely a matter of individual choice. In Valhalla, you're living in the house of a god, following his direct orders, and preparing for a battle that he has ordained. Your spiritual life becomes completely public and entirely subordinated to cosmic military necessity. For warriors who had strong personal relationships with other deities, this can create a sense of religious betrayal. You might have worshipped Freya or Thor or Tyr in life, only to find yourself serving Odin exclusively in death. While these gods are all part of the same pantheon, They have different priorities and different approaches to divine responsibility, and serving one sometimes means disappointing the others. The temporal perspective of immortal existence creates its own psychological challenges. Human decision-making is based on the assumption that time is limited and choices have lasting consequences. But when you have eternity to work with, traditional approaches to prioritizing and planning break down. Why worry about wasting time when you have infinite time? Why make hard choices when you can eventually do everything? This temporal abundance can lead to a kind of psychological paralysis, where decisions become impossible because nothing feels urgent. The warrior who spends 50 years mastering one particular weapon technique isn't being inefficient, he's taking advantage of having unlimited time to pursue perfection. But the same logic can justify spending 50 years avoiding difficult conversations, postponing important decisions, or delaying personal growth. The knowledge that Ragnarok will eventually come adds a different kind of psychological pressure. Unlike most immortal beings in mythology, the Einherjar know that their immortality has an expiration date. When the final battle is fought, many of them will die permanently, and even the survivors will face a completely transformed cosmos. This creates a unique form of existential anxiety, where you're preparing for your own likely destruction while simultaneously working to make that destruction meaningful. The relationships formed in Valhalla have a psychological intensity that's difficult to understand from a mortal perspective. When you know that you'll be fighting alongside someone at the end of the world, when you've shared countless deaths and resurrections with them, when you've had centuries to develop trust and understanding, the bonds that form are unlike anything possible in mortal life. But these relationships also come with the knowledge that they'll likely end in mutual destruction. The warriors you're closest to are the ones most likely to die beside you in Ragnarok, which means that every friendship is shadowed by anticipated loss. This can make it difficult to form emotional attachments, or conversely, it can make every relationship feel desperately precious because you know it won't last forever. The physical aspects of immortal existence create their own psychological adjustments. Your body in Valhalla is stronger, faster, and more resilient than your mortal body, but it's also not quite the same body you remember. The process of dying and being restored changes you in subtle ways that accumulate over time. After centuries of this process, you might find that your immortal body feels foreign, like wearing clothes that don't quite fit. The enhanced physical capabilities also change how you relate to the world around you. When you can lift weights that would have been impossible in life, move faster than humanly possible, and endure damage that would have been fatal, your sense of personal limitation changes fundamentally. This can be liberating, but it can also be disorienting, especially when you realize that your enhanced capabilities are still inferior to those of many other warriors in Valhalla.
The constant preparation for a battle that may not come for thousands of years creates a unique form of psychological tension. Military training usually has a clear endpoint. Either you go to war, or the threat passes, or the conflict is resolved through other means. But Ragnarok is inevitable, and it's also indefinitely delayed. You're preparing for something that will definitely happen, but you have no idea when. This creates a psychological state similar to chronic anxiety, where you're always ready for something terrible that never quite arrives. The adrenaline response that helps you perform in training becomes a constant background hum of tension that never fully resolves. Over time, this can wear down even an immortal mind. The moral complexity of your situation in Valhalla adds another psychological burden. You're preparing to fight in a battle that will destroy much of existence as you know it. The forces you're fighting against include gods and giants and monsters, but they also include beings who might have legitimate grievances against the current cosmic order. Loki, the primary enemy in Ragnarok, isn't evil in the traditional sense. He's responding to being bound and tortured for centuries because of his role in Baldur's death. This means that your cosmic mission isn't as morally clear-cut as simple stories suggest. You're not just fighting for good against evil. You're fighting to preserve a particular arrangement of power that benefits some beings at the expense of others. Understanding this moral complexity while maintaining the psychological commitment necessary for effective military service requires a kind of mental compartmentalization that can be psychologically costly. The gradual loss of your mortal identity creates perhaps the deepest psychological challenge of existence in Valhalla. Over centuries of training, fighting, and living according to warrior culture, the person you were in life slowly fades away. Your mortal memories become distant and dreamlike. Your human relationships lose their emotional resonance, and your personal history becomes just background information rather than the foundation of your identity. This isn't necessarily a bad thing from the perspective of military efficiency. Warriors who are completely committed to their role in Valhalla, who have no competing loyalties or distracting attachments, are probably more effective in training and will be more reliable in battle. But from the perspective of personal continuity, it represents a kind of death that's arguably more final than physical death. And perhaps most challenging of all is the realization that these psychological changes are not only inevitable, but necessary. To function effectively in Valhalla, to serve your role in the cosmic order, to contribute meaningfully to the preparation for Ragnarok, you need to become someone fundamentally different from who you were in mortal life. The alternative, trying to maintain your human psychology in an environment designed for immortal warriors, would lead to madness, despair, or complete dysfunction. So the question isn't whether you could handle the psychological challenges of Valhalla, but whether you could handle becoming the kind of person who could handle them. And for most people, that transformation would be more terrifying than any physical danger they might face.
Now let's discuss something that would absolutely overwhelm any modern person trying to survive in Valhalla: the weapons and magical systems that define daily existence there. Because while popular culture has given us some idea of what divine weapons might be like, the reality of training with tools that operate according to completely different physical laws would be both fascinating and terrifying. The weapons in Valhalla aren't just better versions of earthly weapons. They're fundamentally different objects that incorporate magical properties, divine craftsmanship, and cosmic forces that don't exist in Midgard. A sword in Valhalla might be sharper than any material substance, but it might also be intelligent, emotionally responsive, or connected to elemental forces that affect how it behaves in combat. Take, for example, the concept of a blade that never dulls. This isn't just convenient, it changes the entire nature of swordplay. In Mortal Kombat, weapons degrade during use, which affects timing, balance, and effectiveness as a fight progresses. But a divine sword maintains its perfect edge regardless of how it's used, which means that combat techniques developed for mortal weapons don't translate directly to divine ones. Similarly, armor in Valhalla might be forged from materials that only exist in other realms, using techniques that incorporate runic magic and divine intervention. This armor might be lighter than air but stronger than steel, or it might respond to the wearer's thoughts and emotions, changing its properties based on tactical needs.
Learning to fight in such armor would require completely relearning how to move, balance, and respond to attacks. The magical aspects of Valhalla's weapons would be particularly challenging for someone from the modern world. Many of the Einherjar carry weapons that were enchanted by dwarven smiths using techniques that combine metallurgy with spellcasting. These weapons might have their own personalities, preferences for particular types of combat, or requirements for proper use that go beyond simple physical manipulation. A spear that always hits its target sounds like an advantage, until you realize that it might choose its own definition of target based on criteria you don't understand. A shield that deflects any attack might have specific conditions for activation that require magical knowledge or spiritual preparation. An axe that can cleave through any material might demand payment in blood or honor that you're not prepared to provide. The runic magic that permeates Valhalla's weapon systems would be completely foreign to modern thinking. Runes aren't just symbols, they're cosmic forces that can be carved into objects to change their fundamental properties. A sword inscribed with the proper runes might be able to cut through dimensions, strike multiple opponents simultaneously, or inflict wounds that affect the target's spirit, as well as their body.
But using runic magic requires understanding not just the symbols themselves, but the cosmic principles they represent. Each rune embodies specific concepts related to fate, power, transformation, and the structure of reality. Using them incorrectly could result in weapons that backfire spectacularly, turning their power against their wielders, or creating uncontrolled magical effects that endanger everyone nearby. The maintenance requirements for divine weapons would also be unlike anything you've experienced. Mortal weapons need sharpening, cleaning, and occasional repair. Divine weapons might need ritual purification, magical recharging, or spiritual bonding ceremonies to maintain their effectiveness. The sword that served you well last week might become sluggish and unresponsive if you haven't performed the proper maintenance rituals. And learning these rituals requires magical knowledge that takes decades to acquire. The psychological aspects of wielding divine weapons create their own challenges. When your sword is intelligent enough to have opinions about your combat technique, fighting becomes a collaborative effort between you and your weapon. Some weapons are supportive partners that enhance your natural abilities, while others are demanding masters that expect you to adapt to their preferences. A few are actively hostile, treating their wielders as temporary conveniences while pursuing their own agendas. This means that selecting weapons in Valhalla isn't just about finding tools that match your fighting style. It's about finding weapons whose personalities are compatible with yours. A warrior who prefers straightforward, honorable combat might be completely unsuited to wielding a weapon that specializes in trickery and deception. Someone who fights with cold, tactical precision might clash with a weapon that craves glory and dramatic gestures. The interconnected nature of Valhalla's magical systems creates additional complexity. Your weapon, armor, and accessories don't just work independently, they form integrated systems where each component affects the others. The combination of a particular sword with a particular shield might create magical resonances that enhance both, or it might create conflicts that reduce their effectiveness. This means that learning to fight in Valhalla involves not just mastering individual pieces of equipment, but understanding how different combinations work together. The armor that makes you nearly invulnerable might interfere with the magical properties of certain weapons. The shield that perfectly complements your fighting style might be incompatible with the helmet you need for protection against specific types of magical attacks.
The training weapons used in daily practice are scaled down versions of the equipment that will be used in Ragnarok, but they still incorporate many of the same magical principles. This is necessary because fighting with mundane weapons wouldn't prepare warriors for the realities of cosmic warfare. But it also means that even routine training exercises involve magical forces that could be dangerous if not properly controlled. Learning to use these training weapons safely requires understanding not just their physical properties, but their magical limitations and requirements. A practice sword might be designed to inflict non-permanent damage, but it might still be capable of causing magical effects that persist beyond the daily resurrection. A training spear might be less lethal than its full power equivalent, but it could still bind your soul to the weapon if used incorrectly. The competitive aspects of weapons training in Valhalla would be unlike anything in mortal martial arts. When everyone has access to magical weapons, the determining factors in combat become not just skill and strength, but magical knowledge, spiritual development, and the quality of the relationships between warriors and their equipment. A technically superior fighter might lose to someone who has formed a deeper bond with their weapon, or who understands runic magic better.
This creates a learning environment where traditional concepts of fair competition don't apply. Your success in training depends not just on your own efforts, but on factors like the magical compatibility between you and available weapons, your aptitude for learning runic systems, and your ability to form spiritual bonds with intelligent equipment. Some warriors excel quickly because they have natural talents for magical interaction, while others struggle for decades with concepts that can't be learned through simple practice. The cultural aspects of weapon use in Valhalla reflect the diverse backgrounds of the Einherjar. Different warrior traditions have their own approaches to magical weapons, their own relationships with divine craftsmanship, and their own understanding of how spiritual forces should be integrated into combat. A Celtic warrior who views weapons as extensions of personal honor might have difficulty adjusting to Norse weapons that operate according to different spiritual principles. These cultural differences become particularly important when weapons are shared or passed down from one warrior to another. A weapon that was perfectly suited to a Roman legionary might be completely inappropriate for a Viking berserker, not because of physical differences, but because of incompatible spiritual and cultural approaches to warfare. Learning to use weapons effectively in Valhalla requires not just technical skill, but cultural adaptability. The strategic implications of divine weapons extend far beyond individual combat effectiveness. When entire armies are equipped with magical weapons, traditional tactical thinking becomes obsolete. Concepts like terrain advantage, numerical superiority, and logistical support need to be reconsidered in light of weapons that can teleport their wielders, shields that create impenetrable barriers, and armor that makes warriors effectively invulnerable to conventional attacks. This means that tactical training in Valhalla involves learning to think about warfare in completely new ways. The strategies that worked in mortal conflicts might find themselves completely outclassed by warriors who understand how magical weapons change the fundamental nature of combat.
The ethical considerations of divine weapons create their own philosophical challenges. When your sword is intelligent enough to make moral judgments, when your armor has opinions about the righteousness of your cause, when your shield can refuse to protect you if it disapproves of your actions, warfare becomes as much about spiritual worthiness as about tactical skill. This adds a layer of moral complexity to every combat situation. You can't just focus on winning. You have to consider whether your methods and motivations are acceptable to your equipment. A weapon that has served you faithfully for centuries might abandon you in a crucial moment if it decides that your actions are dishonorable, regardless of the tactical necessities of the situation. The long-term relationships that develop between warriors and their weapons create unique forms of partnership that have no equivalent in mortal experience. Over centuries of shared combat, mutual dependence, and spiritual bonding, the boundary between warrior and weapon can become blurred. You might find yourself thinking thoughts that originate from your sword, feeling emotions that belong to your armor, or making decisions based on the accumulated wisdom of equipment that has served dozens of previous wielders. This symbiotic relationship can be enormously beneficial, creating a level of combat effectiveness that neither warrior nor weapon could achieve independently. But it also means that losing a weapon becomes a form of psychological trauma, like losing a part of yourself. When weapons are destroyed in training or reassigned to other warriors, the emotional impact can be devastating, requiring significant adjustment periods to form new partnerships. And perhaps most challenging of all is the realization that mastering divine weapons isn't just about becoming a better fighter, it's about becoming a different kind of being entirely. The magical forces involved in wielding cosmic weapons change you on fundamental levels, altering your spiritual development, your relationship with reality, and your understanding of your place in the universe. The person who could effectively wield the divine weapons of Valhalla wouldn't be recognizably human in the way we understand humanity. They would be something new, something that exists at the intersection of mortal determination and cosmic power. And while that transformation might be necessary for the defense of the Nine Worlds, it would represent the final death of everything that made you uniquely yourself.
As we reach the end of our journey through the reality of daily life in Valhalla, let's consider what all this preparation is actually leading toward. Because Ragnarok isn't just another battle, it's the end of the world as we know it. And understanding what the Einherjar are actually preparing for puts their entire existence into a different perspective. Ragnarok, according to Norse mythology, isn't simply a war between good and evil. It's a cosmic reset, a fundamental transformation of reality that will destroy most of existence and rebuild it in new forms. The warriors of Valhalla aren't just preparing to defend Asgard, they're preparing to participate in the death and rebirth of the universe itself. This means that everything they do in their daily training has implications far beyond military effectiveness. Every skill mastered, every relationship formed, every spiritual development achieved contributes to determining not just who will survive the final battle, but what kind of reality will emerge afterward. The consciousness, values, and accumulated wisdom of the Einherjar will help shape whatever cosmos follows the current one. The magnitude of this responsibility would be psychologically crushing for most people. You're not just learning to be a better warrior, you're helping to prepare the seeds of a new universe. Every mistake you make in training, every failure of courage or wisdom or honor could have consequences that echo through cosmic ages yet to come. The pressure to achieve perfection becomes not just personal, but literally universal. The timeline leading up to Ragnarok adds another layer of complexity to life in Valhalla. The signs that precede the final battle, the Fimbulwinter, the breaking of bonds, the release of monsters, aren't just external events. They're cosmic shifts that affect the nature of reality itself, including the reality within Valhalla. As Ragnarok approaches, the magical systems that govern the hall change. The weapons become more powerful and more dangerous, and the stakes of every training exercise increase. This means that the Valhalla you'd experience as a new arrival would be different from the Valhalla that exists closer to the final battle. The routines, relationships, and challenges that define daily life there evolve as cosmic conditions change. Warriors who have been there for millennia might find themselves needing to relearn fundamental skills as the nature of magic itself shifts in preparation for the end times. The prophetic aspects of Ragnarok create unique psychological challenges for the Einherjar. Unlike most military forces, they know exactly how their war will end. They know which of them will die, which will survive, and what the cost of victory will be. This knowledge comes from Odin's prophetic visions, which are considered absolutely reliable, and it affects how every warrior approaches their preparation. Imagine knowing with certainty that you will die in the final battle, that your death will serve a specific cosmic purpose, and that this outcome cannot be changed regardless of how well you prepare. Some warriors find this knowledge liberating, allowing them to focus entirely on how they die rather than whether they die. Others find it paralyzing, making every day feel like a countdown to an inevitable doom they cannot escape. The warriors who are prophesied to survive Ragnarok face their own psychological challenges. They know they'll witness the death of gods, the destruction of worlds, and the end of everything they've come to know in their immortal existence. They're preparing not just to fight in the final battle, but to rebuild reality afterward, using whatever wisdom and strength they've accumulated during their time in Valhalla. The weapons and magical preparations that seem overwhelming to newcomers are scaled to match the enemies they'll face in Ragnarok. The forces of chaos that will assault Asgard aren't just powerful, they're antithetical to the concept of order itself. Fighting them requires not just superior weapons and tactics, but weapons and tactics that can function in the absence of natural law, in conditions where the basic principles of reality break down. This is why the magic systems in Valhalla are so complex and demanding. The runes carved into weapons aren't just power sources, they're anchors of meaning that will help those weapons function when meaning itself is under attack. The spiritual bonds between warriors and their equipment aren't just tactical advantages, they're lifelines that will keep both warrior and weapon coherent when existence itself becomes incoherent.
The training battles that seem so brutal and repetitive serve a purpose beyond developing fighting skills. They're preparing the Einherjar for combat in conditions that defy comprehension, where the enemy might be capable of unmaking reality around them. The daily experience of death and resurrection isn't just practice for immortal warfare. It's preparation for fighting in a place where death might not be permanent, where resurrection might not be possible, and where the boundary between life and death becomes meaningless. The cultural integration that takes place in Valhalla serves cosmic purposes as well. The final battle won't just be fought by Norse warriors using Norse tactics. It will be fought by the greatest heroes from every culture that ever honored courage in battle. The diversity of fighting styles, spiritual traditions, and strategic approaches represented in Valhalla becomes a strength when facing enemies that transcend any single cultural understanding of warfare. This is why the political challenges of governing millions of diverse warriors aren't just administrative problems, they're essential preparation for cosmic leadership. The warriors who learn to bridge cultural differences, mediate conflicting approaches, and synthesize diverse traditions into unified strategies are developing skills that will be crucial for rebuilding civilization after the old world ends. The psychological transformations that eliminate individual identity serve cosmic purposes too. Warriors who maintain strong attachments to their mortal lives, their personal relationships, and their individual goals would be vulnerable to manipulation by the forces of chaos.
The complete dedication to cosmic purpose that develops over centuries in Valhalla creates beings who cannot be corrupted, threatened, or distracted from their essential role in the universal drama. The knowledge that Valhalla itself will be destroyed in Ragnarok adds poignancy to every aspect of daily life there. The hall that has been home for millennia, the routines that have structured immortal existence, the relationships that have defined identity for countless warriors. All of it will end when the final battle comes. This creates a unique form of anticipatory grief that colors every experience in Valhalla. Warriors know that they're not just preparing for battle, they're preparing to lose everything they've come to know and value. Very success of their mission will result in the destruction of their world, making every victory bittersweet and every preparation an act of willing self-sacrifice. The cosmic scope of what the Einherjar are preparing for would be overwhelming for anyone accustomed to thinking in human terms. They're not just fighting for their own survival, or even for the survival of their friends and loved ones, they're fighting for the continuation of consciousness itself, for the possibility that meaning can exist in the universe, for the principle that order can emerge from chaos. Understanding this responsibility changes the meaning of every aspect of life in Valhalla. The daily training isn't just about becoming better fighters, it's about becoming the kind of beings who can carry forward the best aspects of existence into whatever reality follows the current one. The relationships aren't just about personal satisfaction, they're about creating networks of trust and cooperation that can survive cosmic destruction. The magical development isn't just about gaining power, it's about becoming vessels for wisdom that transcends individual mortality. And this brings us to perhaps the most sobering aspect of life in Valhalla, the realization that everything you become there is in service of something larger than yourself. Something so much larger that your individual desires, preferences, and personal development become irrelevant except as they contribute to the cosmic purpose. The warrior who could truly thrive in Valhalla wouldn't be recognizably human in any sense we understand. They would be something that exists at the intersection of mortal courage and cosmic responsibility, individual skill and universal purpose, personal identity and transcendent dedication. They would be exactly what Valhalla is designed to create, perfect instruments for the preservation and renewal of existence itself. But achieving that transformation requires giving up everything that makes you who you are now. Your human limitations, your personal attachments, your individual quirks and preferences. All of it would be gradually worn away by the daily routine of preparing for cosmic war until what remains is pure function in service of cosmic necessity.
And so we come to the end of our journey through the reality of Valhalla, where the Hall of the Slain isn't quite the paradise of endless feasting that popular stories suggest, but something far more complex, demanding, and ultimately transformative. You wouldn't last a day in Valhalla, not because you lack courage or strength, but because you're human in ways that Valhalla cannot accommodate. The very qualities that make you yourself, your individual perspective, your personal relationships, your human-scale concerns and desires are precisely what would need to be surrendered to function in Odin's cosmic military academy. But perhaps that's not entirely a tragedy. There's something beautiful in the knowledge that the warriors who stand ready to defend existence itself have sacrificed their humanity to do so. They've given up everything that makes life personally meaningful to preserve the possibility that life can have meaning at all. The Valhalla we've explored tonight isn't the glorious reward that warriors dreamed of in life, but it's something arguably more important.
a place where the best aspects of mortal courage are refined into cosmic purpose, where individual heroism becomes universal service, where the desire to protect what we love becomes the will to preserve the very concept of love itself. The Einherjar who trained there daily, who die and rise again in endless preparation, who have surrendered their personal desires for cosmic necessity, they're not just warriors anymore. They're something between human and divine, something that exists to serve purposes too vast for individual comprehension, something that has chosen universal meaning over personal happiness. And in that choice, there's a kind of heroism that transcends the battlefield courage that brought them to Valhalla in the first place. It's the heroism of accepting transformation, of serving something greater than yourself, of willingly becoming whatever is needed for existence itself to continue. So rest now in your own small bed, in your own brief life, with your own perfectly human concerns and relationships and dreams. You don't need to last a day in Valhalla, because the warriors who can are already there, preparing for the battle that will determine whether places like Valhalla or Earth can continue to exist at all. The halls are echoing with the sound of training. The mead is flowing in measured portions. The weapons are being sharpened for cosmic war, and the Einherjar are becoming exactly what they need to become. Not for their own sake, but for ours. Let the horn sound softly in the distance. Let the deer's antlers dim their glow. Let the vast hall settle into its brief quiet before another day of preparation begins. The warriors rest between training and dream of battles to come, and you can rest too, knowing that somewhere beyond the edge of the world, immortal guardians are making ready for the end of everything, so that something new might begin. Sleep well, and let Valhalla keep its eternal watch while you drift into dreams of your own choosing, in a world where individual lives still matter, where personal stories still have meaning, where being human is still possible. The All-Father's ravens fly through distant skies, the world tree's leaves rustle with ancient wisdom, and in the hall of the slain, the greatest warriors of all ages continue their endless preparation. But here, now, in the quiet darkness of your room, you can simply be yourself in all your beautiful human limitation. And that, perhaps, is its own kind of paradise. Close your eyes now. Let the cosmic battles fade into distant thunder, and rest in the knowledge that while you wouldn't last a day in Valhalla, you don't need to. Others have taken on that burden so that you can remain gloriously, imperfectly, completely human.